My phone rang, slicing through the stillness of the early evening. It was Marcus, my son. My first thought was that something had happened. Maybe he needed advice on some business decision or had an issue with the launch he'd been hyping up for months. But the tone of his voice made me doubt that immediately. "Hey, Dad. Got a minute?" Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker, as smooth and rehearsed as it always was when he wanted something. "Of course," I said, trying to sound casual even though my chest tightened at the thought of him asking for yet another favor. "I need you to come to this dinner. It's for investors, important people. You'd be great for the event, Dad." "You always are," he said, throwing that line out there like a gift. But I heard it for what it was: manipulation. I'd been used like this before. When Marcus needed someone to look good next to him, to give the appearance of a supportive, wealthy family, I was the perfect choice. But when the cameras were off, when the conversations turned from networking to personal, I barely existed in his world. "I don't know," I hesitated, my gut twisting. "What kind of dinner is this?" "Small, intimate," he replied, not missing a beat. "We're launching this new venture and I want you there to support it. Show that family's behind it." I could already hear Celeste's voice in the background, her high-pitched laugh cutting through the line. She was his fiancée, the woman who had all but claimed my son as her own. I heard Helena's voice too, but it was muffled, as if she was standing just far enough away to be heard but not to be noticed. The years of distance between us had become a quiet chasm that even my son couldn't bridge. "And Mom?" I asked, the word feeling strange on my tongue. There was a long pause, just enough for me to wonder what was really going on. "She'll be there, obviously," Marcus replied, his voice a little too fast. I could feel my heart sink, knowing that Helena would be there, not to reconnect, not to have a conversation, but to play the part of the dutiful wife. A role she had taken on long ago but never really cared for. She had left me in every way that counted long before the divorce papers were ever signed. "All right," I said finally, my voice thick with reluctance. "I'll come. But Marcus, don't think this means—" "Great," he interrupted, excitement ringing through his voice. "Thanks, Dad. It's going to be great. See you there." The line clicked off before I could finish. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe a deeper conversation, maybe a sign that my son actually saw me as more than just a resource for his ambitions. But all I got was another reminder of how I fit into his world. As a tool. I sat back in my chair, staring at the phone in my hand. For a moment, I thought of all the sacrifices I had made for Marcus over the years. The time I spent building my career, designing homes that would last long after I was gone. The nights I stayed up late, making sure he had everything he needed, even though his mother was always the one he turned to when he needed comfort or advice. But what did it matter? It never really changed anything. In the end, Marcus didn't see me as a father. He saw me as a trophy, someone to show off at dinners to make his world seem more complete. I hung up the phone and walked into the kitchen of the house I had designed, the house that once felt like home. Now, it felt like a reminder of everything I had lost. Helena would be there too. The thought of seeing her again, so close yet so far, made my hands tighten around the edge of the counter. There was so much unsaid between us, so much resentment we never addressed. But maybe, just maybe, this dinner would be the moment. The one where everything could be different. I tried to convince myself it was possible. But deep down, I knew the truth. The call ended and the silence of the house crept in around me. I felt it all at once, the weight of the walls, the stillness that had replaced the laughter and life that used to fill this place. The kitchen, once a space full of warmth, now seemed cold. I had designed it myself, down to the smallest detail, the granite countertops, the cherry wood cabinets, the open layout that flowed into the dining area. It was all mine, and yet it felt like a foreign place. I stood there for a moment, lost in my thoughts, when I heard the familiar footsteps. Helena. I didn't need to look up to know it was her. It was always her. Her presence still held the power to stir something inside me, something I couldn't name. She entered the kitchen and, without acknowledging me, went straight to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water and twisting off the cap. "How was your day?" I asked, the words sounding strange to my own ears. We hadn't had a real conversation in what felt like forever. She barely glanced at me before answering, "Fine. Went for a walk. It was nice out." The simplicity of her response made something in me snap. The effortlessness of it. The way she moved through this house like it was hers. The way she had, over time, stripped it of everything that used to matter to us. "Do you think he'll be happy to see me?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. It wasn't just Marcus I was worried about, it was everything. The fractured family, the years of silent dinners, the unspoken regrets that lingered between us. Helena paused, her hand resting on the counter. She didn't answer right away, and I wondered if she had heard the question at all. Finally, she spoke, but her voice was distant, like she was talking to someone far away. "He'll be fine," she said. He's used to you being there when he needs you. Her words stung, but I wasn't surprised. It was always the same. When I was around, I was the backup. The one who picked up the pieces. The one who came through when things fell apart. But when it came to real connection, real emotion, I was invisible. I guess so, I muttered, trying to focus on the photo album in front of me that I had pulled out from the storage closet earlier. My old architectural sketches and family photos, the ones I hadn't been able to part with. I flipped through the pages absent-mindedly. There was Marcus, a smiling kid holding up a trophy from his Little League game. And then there was Helena and me, so young, so full of promise in that photo. Do you ever miss it? I asked, looking up at her. She was standing near the window now, looking out at the garden I had built with my own hands. The one we used to sit in together back when things weren't so broken. Miss what? She replied, not turning to face me. Us. This. The way it was. Before, I trailed off, unable to say the words. Before everything became about survival. About getting through the next day. About keeping up appearances. Helena's silence was thick, almost suffocating. She wasn't looking at me anymore, her eyes trained on the garden, her face unreadable. The distance between us had always been more than physical. It was a quiet erosion that I had failed to notice until it was too late. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now. It wasn't as simple as you think. I didn't respond right away, unsure of what to say. There was no point in asking her what had gone wrong. We both knew. We had grown apart, piece by piece. I had been busy with my work and she had found solace in other things. I hadn't fought for us. And neither had she. I closed the photo album, feeling the weight of the years pressed down on me. My hands shook slightly, but I steadied myself, turning back toward her. We're going to have to face this, I said softly, though I wasn't sure I meant just the dinner. Helena turned slightly, her back still to me. We don't have to do anything, she said, her voice sharp. You're going. That's it. Her words stung, but they were true. She wasn't interested in fixing anything, and neither was I, not really. We had stopped being the people who cared for each other a long time ago. But maybe, just maybe, I could find something of the man I used to be in that dinner. Maybe I could find a part of myself that wasn't consumed by all the bitterness, all the disappointment. I grabbed my jacket, feeling the weight of the years settle on my shoulders. I'm going to the dinner, Helena, I said, turning toward the door. But I'm not doing it for you. Or Marcus. Or anyone else. She didn't answer. But I heard the faint sound of a tear slipping down her cheek before I left the room. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. But I knew one thing. It was time to stop being invisible. Time to stop being the backup plan. Time to take back what was mine. The evening came quickly. I left the house feeling a quiet resolve, the kind you get when you know something's not right but you're too tired to question it anymore. I dressed carefully, a dark suit that had seen better days, but it still fit me well enough. I wasn't doing this to impress anyone. No, tonight was about proving something to myself. The restaurant was a posh rooftop venue with floor-to-ceiling windows offering sweeping views of the city that stretched out in every direction. It was exactly the kind of place Marcus would choose for an event like this. All polished glass, gleaming marble, and that air of exclusivity that made you feel like you were part of something important, whether you were or not. I walked in and was immediately hit by the scent of expensive food and wine. The hum of quiet conversation filled the air, and waiters glided through the crowd like shadows, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. I spotted Marcus across the room. He was standing near a long, white marble bar, laughing with a few well-dressed people I didn't recognize. His smile was wide, his hairstyle just the way I remembered, perfectly in place. But there was something off about the way he held himself, like he was playing a part, trying to make everything look effortless when it wasn't. Celeste was next to him, a hand on his arm, her eyes scanning the room, her smile sharp and rehearsed. She looked like she belonged, but I couldn't shake the feeling she was sizing everyone up, weighing their worth in a way only people like her could. Then there was Helena. She stood quietly near the windows, half hidden in the shadows as though trying to blend into the background, a guest in her own life. She hadn't seen me yet. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted her to. What could I possibly say to her after all these years? After everything? But Marcus saw me first. His eyes caught mine across the room, and the briefest flicker of something crossed his face, surprise, maybe. But there was no warmth in it. There never was, not really. He excused himself from his group and walked toward me, his hand extended in a practiced gesture of greeting. "Dad, glad you could make it," he said with that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His voice was polished, like it had been rehearsed for just this moment. I shook his hand, trying to hide the frustration rising in me. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing my voice to sound light, even though it felt heavy in my chest. He gave me a quick, tight smile, then glanced over his shoulder at Celeste, who had already started chatting with someone else, her attention elsewhere. Marcus looked back at me. "Let me show you to your seat," he said, steering me away from the bar. I followed him to the table where two other people sat, strangers to me. Investors, I assumed. It didn't matter who they were. They were just names, faces to make the night seem important. I took my seat, my back stiff, feeling like a puppet in a well-rehearsed show. Marcus greeted everyone at the table, introducing me to them with a level of enthusiasm that felt hollow. Then he turned to me again, his face a little too bright. "Would you mind if we start without the toast? Just need to get things rolling." His tone was casual, but I saw the way his eyes shifted between me and Celeste across the room. There was something urgent in his gaze. Something calculated. "Go ahead," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Marcus nodded sharply, and the evening proceeded like a mechanical machine. The conversations flowed easily, the fake laughter, the empty pleasantries, all of it felt scripted. I barely participated. I couldn't bring myself to care about any of it. At one point, Celeste walked over, her heels clicking with purpose on the marble floor. She smiled at me, too wide, too practiced. "I'm so glad you could make it, Thomas," she said. "Marcus has told me so much about you." Her voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it, a sense that she wasn't saying what she really meant. Her eyes, cold and calculating, flicked over to Marcus, who was talking with the investors, his back to us. I gave her a small nod. "It's nice to be here," I said, keeping my tone polite but distant. She didn't seem to mind. Instead, she took a seat next to me, folding her hands delicately in her lap. The conversation continued, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. I was a prop in Marcus's life, a background piece to make his success story seem more real. Then, the moment I'd been dreading arrived. Marcus stood up, raising his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice booming through the room. The noise quieted immediately, and all eyes turned toward him. "To legacy. To family. To the people who support us when we need it most." The toast was meant to sound heartfelt, but I knew better. It wasn't about honoring anyone. It was about making sure everyone knew how important Marcus was, how successful he had become, and how much he relied on people like me to help him get there. He turned toward me, his eyes glinting. "Dad, thank you for always being there. Your support means the world to me." I should have been flattered, but all I felt was a sickening mix of anger and resignation. I wasn't here for his success. I was here because he needed me to play the part of the proud father. He needed me to prove his legitimacy in front of the investors. I raised my glass half-heartedly, offering the briefest of smiles. "To legacy," I said, my voice tight. And that's when the evening took its turn. Celeste, with a practiced smile, lifted her glass and made a different kind of toast. "And to the future," she said, her voice suddenly more authoritative. "I think, Thomas, it's only fitting that you make a contribution to tonight's event. It would really help us reach our goal." Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. The tension in the room shifted. Suddenly, the elegant dinner, the beautiful venue, the guests in their polished suits, it wasn't about celebration. It was a setup. Contribution. I asked, my voice dangerously low. "What do you mean?" Celeste didn't hesitate. "The cost of tonight's event is substantial. $60,000. We need someone to cover it. And, well, Marcus is already stretched thin." I stared at her, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the thinly veiled ultimatum. "Or," I asked, my voice steady even though my chest was tight with rage. "Or we'll have to reconsider the future of this family," she said, her smile never wavering. "After all, Marcus can't afford to keep people around who aren't supportive, can he?" I looked around the table. The investors, the polite smiles, the silence hanging thick in the air. They were waiting to see what I would do. I had a choice to make. I didn't say a word. The air between me and Celeste felt like it had turned solid, heavy, suffocating. For a moment, the world around me went silent. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses from the other tables, the soft hum of quiet conversation, but it all sounded distant, like it wasn't real. The only thing that mattered was the small circle of people watching me, waiting for a response. Marcus shifted in his seat, the tightness in his posture betraying his usual smooth confidence. He knew exactly what this was about. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about legacy. This was about using me and everyone else to get what he wanted. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I had seen this coming for weeks, maybe longer. The manipulation, the calculated moves, the way he had begun to distance himself from the very people who made him. This dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an ultimatum. A show to prove that without my money he couldn't make it. And Celeste? She was the knife in his back, the one twisting things, taking advantage of every moment. I took a deep breath, allowing the silence to stretch, making them all wait. It wasn't their game anymore. It was mine. $60,000, I repeated, the words rolling off my tongue slowly. Is that the price of this family's support? Celeste's smile never faltered, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She wasn't expecting me to question her. She thought I'd fold. She thought I'd cave. Look, Thomas, she said, her voice coated with faux sweetness, Marcus is building something here, something big. We're trying to create a future, a legacy. It's not just about us. It's about the people who believe in us. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice, but not enough to make it intimate. She still kept that edge of distance, the calculated coldness that came with a person who only saw value in others when it benefited them. You've always been the one to support him. The least you can do is help us secure this future. I kept my gaze steady on her, my jaw tightening, but I didn't blink. I wasn't going to let her control the conversation. I had been giving for so long, years of my time, my money, my life, and now it was clear, I had never been part of the plan. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. You're right, I said, suddenly calm, my voice quiet enough to draw everyone's attention. I have supported Marcus. But it's not because I want a seat at his table. It's because he's my son. Or, at least, I used to believe he was. I glanced over at him, watching as his face stiffened. The truth was too close now, too raw. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. The room felt colder now, but I was too far in to back down. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with a deliberate movement, the scrape of it against the floor a sharp contrast to the quiet murmurs around me. You want 60,000? I asked, meeting Celeste's gaze directly. You'll get it. But not the way you think. I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out an envelope. The room had gone completely still by now, all eyes on me. I set it down on the table between me and Celeste. Her eyes darted to it, then back at me, her expression unreadable. She wasn't sure what I was doing, and that was the point. I've already made my choice, I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. I'm done. This dinner, this show, this whole act, it's over. I watched her open the envelope, the moment stretching long enough for everyone to realize that something was different. There was no check inside. There was no promise of support. Just a simple document, folded neatly. Celeste's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it. Her face shifted from confusion to realization, and the blood drained from her cheeks as she scanned the words on the page. What is this? She demanded, her voice high and tense. It's the new power of attorney for my estate, I replied, the words falling out easily now. I've revoked all financial control from Marcus and you, Celeste. It's in Gerald's hands now. You've both been cut out. Permanently. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of my words settled over the table like a storm cloud, thick and suffocating. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I refused to let it break my composure. This was the moment I had prepared for. The moment I stopped being a pawn. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped, his face turning pale, his eyes wide. Celeste, on the other hand, stared at me, her lips pressed into a tight line. You can't do this, Marcus said, his voice sharp. You can't just cut us out like this, Dad. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. I just did. You've been using me, manipulating me, pretending to care about family when all you care about is what you can get from me. That stops tonight. I took a breath, my gaze sweeping across the table at the stunned faces. You wanted 60,000? Fine. But you'll never see another dime from me. This family, this legacy you're so desperate to build? It's built on lies, on manipulation. And I'm done supporting it. For a moment, Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. No more. You've made your choices. Now you live with them. I stood, turning away from the table. Behind me, I could hear the frantic rustling of papers, the hurried whispers of confusion, but I didn't care. I had prepared for this moment long before they had even thought to ask me for anything. I knew exactly what I was doing. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. As I walked out of the room, the sound of stunned silence filled my ears, but I didn't look back. The world had shifted in that moment, and there was no going back. The drive home was quiet. The city lights blurred as I passed them, one after another. The car hummed beneath me, but my mind raced with the weight of what I had just done. The finality of it settled deep within me, colder than the winter air pressing against the windows. I wasn't angry anymore. Not like I used to be when Marcus or Helena would manipulate me when I'd sacrifice more than I should for a family that barely acknowledged me. No, this time I felt free. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken back control of my life. The house, the one I designed, the one that had once been filled with laughter and warmth, seemed almost foreign as I walked through the front door. The silence greeted me. It wasn't a welcoming silence, but a hollow one. I stood in the foyer, staring at the walls that had once felt like home. Now they just seemed empty, just like everything else. I walked into my study, my sanctuary. The room was lined with bookshelves filled with architectural plans, old blueprints, and photographs of designs from years ago, memories of a time when I was someone. When my work meant something more than just a way to keep the lights on. I'd been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. The power shift. It wasn't just about money or assets, it was about me reclaiming what I had lost. The legal documents, the trust with Gerald, all of it was in place. I had already transferred everything out of Marcus's reach, out of Helena's grasp. I sat down at my desk and picked up the phone. Gerald's number appeared in my contacts, and I tapped the screen. Thomas, he answered immediately, his voice warm, calm, always steady. How did it go? I let out a breath, my fingers tapping on the desk. It's done. Everything's in place. Marcus and Celeste are out. The assets are secure. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Gerald spoke, his voice softer now. Are you sure about this? It's not a small step, Thomas. You've been in this for a long time. I'm sure, I replied, my voice steady but firm. It's time. They've been using me for years, Gerald. It's time to take control of my own life. I hear you, he said quietly. And the trust is airtight. You've thought this through, haven't you? There's no going back now. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Gerald let out a low sigh, one that hinted at a mixture of concern and respect. You've got your freedom now, Thomas. It's yours to do with what you will. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a peace that I hadn't felt in years. But at the same time, there was a dull ache in my chest. Even after everything, the manipulation, the lies, the betrayal, there was still a part of me that wished things could have been different. A part of me that wanted to believe that family, real family, could still mean something. But I was done pretending. I was done waiting for something that would never come. I'll let you know if I need anything else, I said, my voice softer now, but resolute. Thanks, Gerald. I'll be in touch. Take care, Thomas, he replied, and the line went silent. I sat there for a moment, staring at the desk in front of me, letting the reality of my decision settle over me. The power shift had happened. The money was no longer in their hands. They would have to figure things out on their own. But for me, this was the beginning of something new. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The world felt different now. I wasn't weighed down by obligations. I wasn't trapped in a life that had never really been mine. It had been a long time coming. And yet, as I stood there, staring out at the darkness, I felt a new sense of purpose. A new sense of freedom. I walked back into the house and up the stairs, the silence of it all enveloping me. The quiet of my life now seemed peaceful, almost comforting. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending to be something I wasn't. I wasn't playing a part in someone else's game. I walked into my bedroom where the familiar sight of an empty side of the bed greeted me. Helena's absence was a constant, but tonight it didn't sting as it once did. I undressed, changed into something more comfortable, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. There were no more lies to keep track of. No more pretending to be a part of something that had never been real. I had done everything for my family. I had given them my time, my money, my love, and in return I had received nothing but silence. But tonight I reclaimed that silence. It was mine. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what it meant. I grabbed my phone and sent a simple message to Gerald, all set. Then I turned it off, placing it on the nightstand. No more calls. No more noise. It was just me now. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The phone didn't stop ringing for 2 days. It started with Marcus's name flashing on the screen, the calls coming one after another, each one more frantic than the last. The messages from Celeste started pouring in too, their words tinged with panic, accusations, and demands. But I didn't pick up. Not once. I sat in the silence of my home, the quiet almost deafening after the storm of noise I had just walked away from. It was odd when you've lived so long in the chaos of a family, in the noise of their needs and expectations, the absence of it felt like an alien world. I ignored the calls, deleted the messages. I didn't need to listen to their pleas, their threats. The words they were speaking weren't new, just louder and more desperate. They had learned how to manipulate me over the years, how to pull at my strings, how to make me feel like the bad guy for wanting to step away from the suffocating weight of their needs. But I was done. I sat in the living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand, watching the news in the background as if I could drown out the noise of my own thoughts. It didn't work. I couldn't stop thinking about the dinner, about the look in Marcus's eyes when I walked out, about how Celeste's calm, almost triumphant face had never once wavered as she saw the first crack in her perfect world. It wasn't long before the legal notices started arriving. They came in waves, each one more formal than the last. They weren't just angry texts anymore. Now it was written on paper, stamped with the weight of their threats. I opened one envelope, then another, all asking for money, for compensation, for support. There was no acknowledgement of what I had given over the years. No thanks. Just demands. I didn't need to read it all. I could feel the weight of it in the pit of my stomach. This was their game. And for once I wasn't playing. Then a call from Gerald came through. I picked up on the first ring, knowing exactly what he was going to say. Thomas, he began, his voice calm but carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. We need to talk about these lawsuits. You know they're not going to go down without a fight. Your family's not letting go of this easily. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Let them fight, I said. I'm not worried. You're sure? Gerald asked, though it wasn't a question. Because you've set a legal precedent here. Cutting them out like that. It's going to get ugly. Let it, I repeated, my voice quiet but steady. They've been using me for years, Gerald. This is just the consequence of me finally seeing it. I heard him exhale on the other end, a long, slow breath. All right, I'll make sure everything's locked down. But I'm just telling you, you've got to be ready for the fallout. I'm ready, I said, the words coming easier now. I had already prepared for this. I had known it was coming. They've been playing this game for too long. It's time they learned the rules have changed. I ended the call with a quiet certainty. The fallout was coming, but I had already positioned myself. I had secured my finances, moved my assets. I was far more protected than they realized. The calls from my family didn't stop. They got more frantic as the days passed, each voicemail carrying a new wave of guilt, anger, and desperation. I deleted them all without a second thought. By the end of the week, a letter arrived from Marcus. This one was different, formal, impersonal. It wasn't his usual tone, full of manipulation and charm. It was a legal letter demanding that I restore the funds I had cut off, threatening legal action, and trying to paint me as the villain for taking what was rightfully his. I read through it once, then tossed it aside. There was no point in responding. They could have the lawyer they hired. I wasn't going to waste my time on them. The silence around me felt even more profound now, like a vacuum sucking away everything else. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was liberating. There was peace in knowing that no matter how loud they screamed, no matter how hard they tried to pull me back into their world, I didn't have to play along anymore. I spent the next few days focusing on myself, on what I needed for once. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't return messages. I didn't care what they were saying anymore. What had always mattered to me, my work, my peace, my choices, had been lost for too long. But now I was finding it again. Slowly, quietly. I went fishing one morning alone. Just me and the water. No interruptions. No expectations. Just the peaceful rhythm of casting my line and waiting. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't trapped in their noise. And as the sun began to set that evening, casting a warm glow over the water, I realized something. This was my life now. The weight was gone, and I was finally free. It had been a week since the fallout, and I'd settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and foreign. My mornings were quieter now. No more early morning phone calls. No more urgent messages demanding my attention. The stillness felt strange at first, but it was starting to feel like a new kind of peace. I spent my days working on small projects, some for friends who still respected the work I did, some just for the sake of creating. The pressure of Marcus's world had finally lifted, and I found myself rediscovering parts of myself I hadn't known I'd lost. I was sitting in my favorite chair by the window, reading through a set of old architectural plans for a cottage I designed years ago, when I heard a knock on the door. It was a sharp, insistent knock, like someone was in a hurry. I didn't recognize the sound of the knock, so I stood slowly, curious, and a little cautious. I hadn't been expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there stood Ethan, my younger son. His face was tired, the bags under his eyes telling me he hadn't been sleeping well. His hair was messy and he looked different, like he had been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally decided to put it down. I couldn't help but smile when I saw him, though the smile felt strange after all the tension of the past week. Well, I said, stepping aside so he could come in. You found your way to me, huh? Ethan gave a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I thought I'd check in, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I closed the door behind him and motioned for him to take a seat. "What's going on, Ethan? I wasn't expecting you." He hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from me, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. The way he was acting, uncertain, as if he didn't quite belong, struck a chord deep in my chest. It reminded me of how I had felt all those years ago, before I had found my footing in the world again. "I wanted to talk," he said, his voice almost too soft. "About everything. About what's been going on with you and Marcus." I sat down across from him, folding my hands in my lap. "I figured this was coming," I said, my voice calm, though I couldn't help the twinge of sadness that pulled at me. "You've probably heard all the noise. What do you want to know?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to the floor. "I don't know if I even know what to ask, Dad. I've just been thinking about everything, and I wanted to hear it from you. I mean, I know it's been hard between you and Marcus, but I don't really get what happened. Not fully." I exhaled slowly, watching him carefully. Ethan had always been the quieter one of my children, more introspective. Where Marcus had been bold and outwardly ambitious, Ethan had always kept his thoughts close, guarded. And now, it seemed like he was trying to piece together something that had been left in fragments for years. "It's complicated," I said. "But I'll tell you this. I've been used for a long time, Ethan. By Marcus. By Helena. By the idea of what I could do for them. They never really saw me as me. Only as what I could give. What I could provide." Ethan's face tightened, and I saw the shift in his expression. Like something in him clicked. "I know. I get it now," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "Celeste. She tried to turn me against you." I felt my heart skip a beat. I hadn't been expecting this. "She did what?" I asked, leaning forward, my curiosity piqued despite the shock. Ethan looked at me, his eyes dark with something like guilt or frustration. "A couple of months ago, before all this happened with Marcus, Celeste pulled me aside after one of those family dinners. She told me you were trying to pull away from the family and that I should stay close to Marcus. That you'd be disappointed in me if I wasn't there for him." I sat back in my chair, trying to process what he was saying. "She did that," I muttered to myself. "And you didn't believe her, did you?" Ethan shook his head, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "I wanted to believe her. Because I wanted to fit in with all of that. With Marcus, with Celeste. But I've been thinking, and I think I was just looking for something that wasn't real. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't." There was a long silence between us as I let his words sink in. It was clear to me now that Ethan had been carrying the weight of something, guilt, confusion, maybe even shame, for far too long. He had been torn between two versions of his family, the one he wanted to believe in and the one that had been laid out in front of him. "Ethan," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to pretend anymore. None of us do." He looked up at me, his eyes now searching mine. "I want to be real with you, Dad. I don't want to be part of the fake stuff anymore. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I felt a surge of pride and relief rush through me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Ethan finally saw through the noise, when he understood that family wasn't about appearances or manipulation. It was about real connection, real honesty. "We'll figure it out, son," I said, my voice steady now. "Together." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since he walked in. "I want to spend time with you," he said. "Just us. No games. No pretending." I stood up and walked over to the kitchen, grabbing 2 glasses of water. "How about we take a break from all this and go fishing? Just you and me. I know a quiet spot. No distractions." Ethan's face lit up, a small smile creeping up his lips. "Fishing, huh? That sounds perfect." As we walked outside, side by side, I realized something that I hadn't fully grasped until that moment. In the midst of all the chaos and betrayal, this connection with Ethan was the one thing that hadn't been broken. And it was the one thing that would keep me going. We didn't need all the money or the status or the things Marcus and Celeste seemed to value so much. We just needed each other. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that was enough. The silence in my house had become almost comforting. After days of no contact, after the storm of calls and messages that had bombarded me in the beginning, it was quiet now. The kind of quiet that felt like a fresh start. But peace was always fleeting when it came to family. And sure enough, a letter arrived in the mail one morning, a thick envelope, crisp, professional-looking, the kind that screamed legal. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. I could feel the weight of their desperation, the pressure of the threats inside, pushing against the envelope as if it were going to burst open. I placed it on the counter, the paper feeling heavier than it had any right to. It sat there for hours, daring me to read it. I had been expecting this. They wouldn't let me go so easily. Finally, I tore it open. Inside, there was a formal letter, printed in bold typeface, detailing their grievances. The text was suffocating, full of accusations, demands for emotional compensation for the trauma my actions had caused. I skimmed through it quickly. They were claiming damages for the emotional distress I had caused Marcus and Celeste by cutting them off, by making them look bad in front of their investors. They even had the audacity to throw in some legal jargon about breach of family trust, as if this was just another business deal gone awry. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath. They were suing me. Not for money, not directly, but for the illusion of control they had lost when I walked away. They wanted to bleed me dry emotionally, drain me of whatever pride I had left, make me regret standing up for myself. But I wasn't going to give in. Not this time. I folded the letter carefully, setting it aside. A part of me wanted to respond, to send a harsh letter back, to fight fire with fire. But I knew better. No amount of words, no matter how pointed, would change anything. They wouldn't listen. They had never listened. I turned to the next pile of mail, pretending to look at the other documents, but I could feel my blood pressure rising. It wasn't just the letter. It was everything. The manipulation, the guilt trips, the way they had played me for so long. The silence was interrupted by a ring from my phone. The screen lit up with Marcus. My heart rate spiked, but I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear what he had to say. I wasn't going to answer. The voicemail indicator flashed on my phone a few moments later. I hesitated, then played it. "Dad." Marcus's voice came through, strained, like he was trying to keep control. "I don't know what happened. I don't understand. You were always there, and now you've just turned your back on us. Celeste's upset. I'm upset. This isn't how family works. You need to fix this, Dad. You need to come back. This isn't about money. It's about trust. Please, just call me back." The message ended, and I sat in silence. The words echoed in my head, the familiar undertones of manipulation lacing every sentence. I let the phone sit on the table. I didn't respond. The guilt, the anger started to bubble up again, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about them. Their game, their rules, and I was done playing. I couldn't let them drag me back into their world. They were trying to guilt me, trying to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. But I wasn't. I had done what was right for me. I had walked away because I finally realized that I didn't owe them anything. The days passed, and the calls came less frequently. They were wearing down. Desperation had turned into defeat, and I could almost hear the shift in their voices. They were getting tired of fighting. Another letter arrived a few days later. This one was less formal, less legal, but the tone was still the same. Accusatory, judgmental, and drenched in passive aggression. They were trying to guilt-trip me into coming back, to make me feel like I had ruined everything. They wanted me to apologize. I didn't. I read it once, then crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. They couldn't touch me anymore. They couldn't control me. It wasn't just the letters. It was everything, the messages, the guilt, the accusations. It was the way they had treated me for years and never once acknowledged the cost it had on me. Now that I had finally drawn a line, now that I had taken control, they didn't know what to do. I didn't need them. I hadn't needed them in a long time. But the silence still lingered, thick and uncomfortable. I hadn't expected it to feel this heavy. I hadn't expected it to feel like this much of a loss. The weight of it wasn't something I could shake off immediately. But then, another voicemail came. This time it was from Gerald. "Thomas, it's Gerald. Just checking in. I know you've been dealing with a lot, but I wanted to make sure you're still good on the legal front. They've been trying to push things through, and I just want to make sure you're prepared. I've got everything set up, but just give me a call when you can." I sat back, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Gerald had been right. The pressure wasn't over. They were still pushing, but I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything. I called Gerald back. "Everything's locked down," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Let them do what they want. I'm not going to play into their game anymore." "Understood," he said. We're ready. If they want to make this ugly, we'll be ready. But don't let them drag you back in, Thomas. You've made the right choice. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I had made the right choice. It had to be enough. The fallout had begun, and there was no turning back now. It had been a few months since the fallout, and the silence in my life had become familiar. It wasn't the kind of silence I had feared. It was the kind that felt like freedom, like room to breathe without the weight of expectations pulling me down. I had sold the architectural home, the one I had designed and poured my heart into years ago. It was time to let go of that chapter, to move on from the legacy of a life I no longer wanted to live. The house had been full of memories, some good, some painful. But the truth was, it had always been more about appearances than it had been about me. Now I was standing in front of a small lakeside cottage, the kind of place I had always wanted. Simple, modest, peaceful. It didn't have the grand architecture or the polished surfaces of my old life. It wasn't about legacy or luxury. It was just a place to rest, to find quiet. The cottage sat on the edge of a small lake, surrounded by trees that had grown tall and strong, reaching up to the sky. The air here was different, fresh, clean, with the scent of pine and earth mingling in the breeze. It was the kind of place I could feel myself slowing down, the chaos of my past life fading into the distance. I walked through the front door, the old wood creaking beneath my feet. The floors were simple, unfinished but sturdy. The windows let in the light, the kind of natural light that made everything feel warmer, more alive. I had already begun the process of making the space my own, clearing out the boxes and setting up the bare necessities. There was no grand plan here, no clients to impress, no dinners to attend. Just me in the space, shaping it as I went along. I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to ease as I took it all in. The peace of it. The simplicity. It wasn't a home designed for anyone else's approval. It was a place to find myself again. To heal. A few days later, I was walking into town when I saw a sign on the window of a small local shop, tech workshop, helping kids fix devices and build ideas. I stopped in front of the window, intrigued. There were a few kids in the back of the shop, hunched over tables, working on old computers and gadgets. I could see that the space was cluttered, but in a way that made it feel alive, full of potential. I pushed the door open, a little bell ringing above me as I stepped inside. "Can I help you?" A young woman looked up from behind the counter, her hands covered in grease. She smiled politely, but there was a certain warmth to her eyes that made the space feel welcoming. "I was just curious," I said, glancing around the room at the kids who were tinkering with old devices. "This looks like a cool place." "It's a community workshop," she said, leaning forward a little. "We teach kids how to fix electronics, build things, and learn about tech. It's free. We just want to give them something to do, teach them a skill." I nodded, impressed. It was a simple concept, but it had real impact. "That's a great idea," I said, glancing over the workbenches and the cluttered shelves. "You run it all by yourself?" She laughed lightly. "I've got some volunteers who help out, but yeah, it's mostly just me. The kids are great, though. They really get into it." "I can tell," I said, my eyes lingering on the kids who were focused on their projects. I thought about the way Marcus had used to talk about his business ventures, the way he tried to build everything around status and legacy. None of that seemed to matter here. This place was about learning, about creating something real. "You wouldn't happen to be looking for help, would you?" I asked, a thought flashing through my mind. Her eyes brightened. "Actually, yes. We always need help. It's mostly about mentoring the kids, showing them how to take apart and put together the devices. And we could always use extra hands with repairs." I thought about it for a moment. It wasn't a grand plan. It wasn't going to bring in millions or change the world. But it was something real. Something I could get behind. "Count me in," I said, the words slipping out before I had even fully considered them. She smiled, clearly grateful. "That's great. We can always use a hand." I spent the next few weeks in and out of the shop, helping the kids fix devices, teaching them how to troubleshoot and repair old electronics. It felt good, better than anything I had done in years. No meetings, no dinners, no false smiles. Just me and the kids, learning together, building together. One evening, after the kids had left for the day, I sat down at the workbench, the sound of the city fading into the background. The shop was quiet, the air still. I picked up a small broken device, a tablet, and started working on it without thinking. As I fixed the screen, a small hand-drawn card fell out of the back. I turned it over and saw a child's crayon drawing, a simple picture of a house with a sun in the sky and a big smiley face. In the corner, the words "Thank you, Mr. Thomas" were written in shaky handwriting. I sat back in my chair, the drawing in my hand, and smiled. It wasn't much, just a drawing, a small thank you. But in that moment, it felt like everything. I wasn't building a legacy here. I wasn't trying to create something that would outlast me. But I was doing something meaningful, something that had value. I was helping others, and in turn, I was helping myself. I didn't need a grand house or the approval of anyone else. I didn't need the fake dinners or the manipulative words. What I needed was connection. What I needed was this, a purpose I could believe in. As I looked out the window at the peaceful lake, the sun dipping below the horizon, I realized that this, right here, was home. And for the first time in a long time, it was enough. The days had grown longer, and the warm glow of the summer sun filled the small cottage with a kind of peaceful energy I hadn't known I needed. It wasn't just the natural light, it was everything. The quiet, the simplicity, the feeling that I was finally, truly building something of my own. Ethan had been coming over more often. Sometimes we'd just sit on the porch, talking about life or fishing down by the lake. Other times, he'd bring Nia, his girlfriend. She was kind, thoughtful, and seemed to fit right in. I noticed the way Ethan's face would light up whenever she was around, and it made something inside me shift, a quiet pride, knowing he was finding his way. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan and Nia showed up with a stack of plans. "Got something for you," Ethan said, grinning as he sat down next to me. Nia followed behind, holding a rolled-up blueprint in her hands. She unrolled it across the table, revealing a sketch of a small extension to the cabin. "We were thinking," Nia began, her eyes glinting with excitement, "since you're always helping us figure things out, we thought we'd help you. We want to build a little addition to the cottage, something simple but functional. Maybe a small room for you to work in and a space for the kids when they come by." I studied the plans, impressed by the thought and effort they had put into it. It wasn't extravagant, but that was the beauty of it. It was practical. Real. It fit the space, fit the life I was creating. I looked up at Ethan and Nia. "You really want to do this?" I asked, my voice soft. I could feel the pride building up in my chest again, but it wasn't just pride in the plans. It was pride in him, in Ethan, who was growing into someone I could be proud of. Ethan nodded, his smile wide. "Yeah, Dad. We've got the tools, the know-how. It'll be a project, but it's something we can all work on together. It'll give us something to do, and it'll make the place even more yours." Nia added, "Plus, it's not just for you. We're thinking bigger. Maybe a little learning center for kids in the area who want to learn basic carpentry or fixing things. We've got the space, and we could really make it work. It'd be something we could all be proud of." I let the idea sit with me for a moment. A learning center. It wasn't the grand blueprint I'd once dreamed of, it was something more grounded. Something more real. It felt right. This wasn't about creating a legacy of buildings or wealth. It was about giving back. Giving kids the chance to learn something useful, something they could build with their own hands. And the thought of working with Ethan and Nia on something like this, building it together, felt like a way forward. A real way forward. "You two have really thought this through, haven't you?" I said, finally letting a grin slip through. Ethan laughed. "You've always said you wanted to build something that mattered. Well, this feels like it matters." I looked at Nia, and she met my gaze with a soft, steady smile. "It'll be something that lasts, something worth leaving behind," she said. "Not because it's big or fancy, but because it helps people." And in that moment, I realized she was right. The lesson wasn't about grand structures. It wasn't about leaving behind buildings that would stand for years. It was about leaving something meaningful, a place that gave back, a legacy of love, of care, of real, human connection. "Well," I said, standing up and stretching, "I think it's a great idea. Let's start building." Over the next few months, we worked on the extension together, side by side. Ethan and Nia were there every day, sketching, measuring, hammering, learning. It was hard work, but it was the kind of work that meant something. The kind that didn't need recognition, didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be real. The space slowly transformed. What had once been an empty corner of the property became a functional workshop, a place where we could meet and build. We installed a small tool shed, created a workbench, and cleared the space for future projects. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about the time spent together, the hours we shared on the porch after a long day, talking about nothing and everything. It was about seeing Ethan and Nia grow, not just as a couple but as individuals, strong, independent, and full of purpose. One evening, as we were putting the final touches on the addition, Ethan handed me a small, crumpled drawing from one of the kids who had stopped by the workshop earlier that day. It was a simple sketch, a house with a small garden, a tree, and a smiling sun. It was signed in messy handwriting, "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." I stared at the drawing for a moment, the weight of it settling in. These were the moments I had been missing. Not the grand gestures, not the accolades. The simple, honest work. The connection. The feeling of knowing that what I was doing, what we were all doing, mattered. As I sat on the porch that evening with Ethan and Nia, watching the sun set over the lake, I realized something. This was the legacy I wanted. Not a legacy of wealth or fame, but one of purpose. One of building something that made a difference, not just for me, but for others. Ethan turned to me, a thoughtful look on his face. You get to choose who lives in your heart, he said, as if he had just figured out something important. I smiled, nodding slowly. You're right, I said. And I'm choosing you. The three of us sat there, side by side, under the stars. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had everything I needed. I wasn't building a legacy of buildings or money. I was building a legacy of love, of real connection. And that was all that mattered.